That's night sleepers. You've allowed us to wake up on this morning, giving us life, health, and strength, giving us the activities of our limbs as the blood is running yet through our veins. God, we ask you on today, God, that you would give these people who are on the airways, who are coming on the airways, give them the anointing to convey the message that you have downloaded in them, that they can give unto us. God, we thank you for this day. But this is the day that you have made. We shall rejoice and be glad in it. Father, we thank you because we shall become better men, better women, better families, better communities, better countries, better states, and ultimately a better world for you. We give you thanks in Jesus' name we pray. Amen and thank God. Well, we say a pleasant good morning to you, everyone.
Good
All right.
morning.
Good morning, Bishop.
Good morning.
And thank you for that prayer this morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here on today and good to hear your voices all on this morning. And we say, it's in your hands. God bless you.
God bless you too, Bishop. Thank you. All right, a little bit of Portsmouth coffee talk music. Every day we rise is a great day to be alive. And we want to thank everyone for listening on WPL 1350 AM. And sorry, got a little carried away with the music. But anyway, we want to thank everybody on WGPL 1350 AM on your dial and Facebook Live. And we want to, on a personal note, I want to say this. 7 years ago, on February the 7th, 2015, I received my new heart, life-saving heart. And today, February the 7th, 2022, makes 7 years.
Amen.
And 7 is a significant number in the Bible. So
yes, it is.
maybe one day we'll talk about that. But and tomorrow I'll have my 7th annual checkup, which one of those checkups that take all day. But I just wanted to, on a personal note, and the three members, the three people, the co-hosts and the guests on here were a significant part of doing my recovery or doing my journey. I want to thank you all. The visits from you, Leah, and the Colonel, the consultation and challenging the doctors in there. And Kenny, your visits and concerns and your help afterwards, you know, the things you did to help me out afterwards. So
that's right.
I want to just show my appreciation and all the people that came. And it was one of those experiences where I got a chance where people walked in my room that had never met me before, because I was kind of writing down my experience every day, sometime in a comedic way. And people, I can't tell you how many people walked in there, sight unseen, just to pay a visit to me and our friends today. So just wanted to mention that 777 all the way through. So anyway, that was a personal note. But today on Portsmouth Coffee Talk, we have a special guest, and it is Kenny Wright, citizen Kenny Wright, but he is the former mayor of the city of Portsmouth. And he's here today to talk about finances, generational wealth, and a little bit about the history of generational or Black wealth, period. And, and I want Colonel to start out, but before you start out, Colonel, I want to ask Kenny a question. I know many people know his story coming from humble beginnings. And I wanted to ask you, Kenny, when did you first start or became aware of how important it is to pay attention to your wealth? I mean, well, your finances, to the point where you could build up something. Oh, hold on, Colonel, yeah. I think you want to give you a disclaimer.
Yeah, before you got to do that disclaimer before we do anything. The views listed or said on this program are those of the hosts and our guests, and not of the radio station. So let's get that out of the way, that housekeeping stuff first. And so,
yes, sir. Because we have two, Colonel, and we have Kenny up here, and they, yes, we have to get that.
Well, let me say thanks and good morning. But it was as early as I can remember, around 5 or 6 years old. You got to remember being in Portsmouth in a family of 9. It was hard getting things, food, clothes, toys. And most of the stuff we got, we had to share. And I never forget when we were young. I don't know if y'all remember the bank, F&M Bank on High Street.
Yeah. Yeah.
They used to have what they call the Christmas Club.
Yes.
And my mother bought us those little books.
Uh-huh.
And we would go in there, whether it was weekly, bi-weekly, and she would always put $1 or $2 into those accounts. And I could watch my Christmas Club money grow. And I knew by Christmas just how much money I had. And that was very important when you come from a family where everything is shared, clothes, food. I mean, you wanted to have something of your own, and then you get to decide. Well, mama always had a heavy hand in it, but she let you pick. Kenny, what do you want? What do you want to do with this? I mean, at the end of the year, it might been a couple of $100, but that's a lot when you're talking a poor family and you're putting, mama was putting money in and away for us because she saw, and it was like, it intrigued me. And I carried that over from a kid to my paper route. And when I was the first paper boy out in London Oaks, and man, I tell you, to be able to save your money and to learn about business. Oh, and London Oaks taught me a whole lot about doing business with Black folks. I didn't understand that newspaper thing. Uh-huh. But you got to get their money first when you collect, and then what's left is yours. Mm-hmm. And you had a lot of us out there that wouldn't pay. And boy, I tell you what, that was not pleasant. And once you understood that business, then you understood that, hey, I need to do some work around here. And the beauty of London Oaks is as it grew, they kept opening up more and more sections. Mm-hmm. So as people moved in, they wanted a newspaper. So Kenny Wright knew the people that wasn't paying. I would sell their newspaper to these new folks that came in because it got me instant money. Mm-hmm. So I've been kind of fascinated with money and watching people like my father and a lot of the other people. I mean, when we were growing up, we all knew people that had a hustle. Mm-hmm. I mean, even in my church as a kid, we were born and reared in Morning Star Baptist Church down on Virginia Avenue in Pennis Point. Yeah. Right next door to the church was an older fella named Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown had more junk over there in his yard. And as kids, that's what we thought it was. As we got older, everybody in the neighborhood went to see Mr. Brown. He fixed lawnmowers, he fixed washers, dryers, toaster. Mama used to take everything. She would put it in the car when we were going to church. And before we went into church, she'd want us to run this over there to Mr. Brown's house. I mean, and to see a guy like that everybody in the community went to, I mean, you call it small parts now. I don't know what you call it, but we had people like that in our communities, in our neighborhoods. And you look, and a kid like me that's interested in money and finance, and you see Mr. Brown and you sitting there going, wow, he the man. I thought Reverend Walker was the man. He could pass the Look, Reverend Walker was over in Mr. Brown's yard trying to get something fixed.
Mr. Brown was the man of the hour.
But we had Mr. Browns in all of our neighborhoods.
Yes, we did.
Truxton was full of Mr. Browns.
That's right. So, that's right.
That's one of the things that kind of I hope we get into here, talking about wealth and business and stuff. And those models and those examples, and our kids today are not seeing that, and they don't even know that stuff is achievable, to go learn those types of skills, to be able to do things for themselves. And I actually, for y'all, I got a speech here that I pulled up that John Curry, I don't know how many of y'all remember Mr. Curry.
Mr. Curry from Truxton Elementary School?
Mr. Curry made a speech back in 1995 at the anniversary of Truxton. And in his speech, this is an educator now, he talks immensely about businesses, Black businesses. He paid homage to all of the Black businesses that were in Truxton. He talked about the Viking group that formed in the 30, 39, and all of the stuff they had. He talked about, and he encouraged all of the listeners that you have got to go into business. You've got to learn something and be able to provide that. I saw this and read this and I went, oh my God, I hope y'all give me a couple of minutes to mention his comments here, because I don't know, Mr. Curry and I worked together for about a year and a half at his house.
Oh, really?
Back in 2000.
On Portsmouth Boulevard?
On Portsmouth Boulevard. In 2000, we were trying to do the history. I was president of the Portsmouth Pan-Atlantic Council,
Right.
and we were trying to do a history of the educational system in Portsmouth. That was our theme. And you know me, Mr. Engineer, I want it right. I want to talk to the go right to the source. And Dr. Owens, who was my mentor, gave me a lot of information, but he led me to Mr. Curry. And I never forget going to that old man's house, knocking on his door. Mr. Curry at that age, he was about 93, 94. He would, if he opened the door, it was just a crack. And he would like, what do you want? How can I help you? Go away. And I mean, he sent me away a couple of times, and I called Dr. Owens, and I don't know, I had an older fraternity brother named Mr. Choate, Mr. William Choate, that lived in Prentice Park over there off of Evergreen.
Yes.
I was in his living room, and he called. He said, Carrie, open that door and let that boy in. He just got some questions. He's trying to find something out, and you can tell him more than anybody else. And I heard, he says, you know, at that time you couldn't hear the phone, but he must have said okay, because Mr. Choate told me, go on back round there. So I go back over there, knock on that door on Portsmouth Boulevard, and he opens it up and says, come on in. What's your name? And that started a 1.5 year relationship. That by the time I got done with this thing, Mr. Curry was calling my office downtown probably every other day, looking through and rambling through all of his stuff, trying to show me how things were at the time and why he did some of the things he did, because he was intriguing. Because my mother went to Penner's Point Colored School. And she tells me, as a grown woman, they were scared to death of Mr. Curry.
Mr. Curry
so were the teachers.
He was my principal, so I can tell you that now.
Well, he was a no-nonsense guy.
No nonsense.
And his version of why he was that way, and it took me a while to ask him, why was he, I didn't say mean, but why were you, I didn't want to tell him, my mama said you were mean. But and he kind of gave me the answer. And if you follow Hampton University and you listen to Bill Harvey, Dr. Harvey talk about why he does what he do, is when these folks leave you alone and these folks allow you to do what you want, you do not want to embarrass your race and your generation, allowing people to do things that you know are not acceptable at the time. And he wanted his Black teachers and kids to be excellent, not average. He wanted excellence. And he did things like that variety show. You know, him and his wife, they never had kids, but they traveled every year. And he would come and he would give the teachers the theme for this year, if it was China or Russia, and the teachers had to work with the kids and do something along the lines of that theme. And then they had the big annual show at the Truxton School in the auditorium.
That's right.
And it was a big to-do. And he talked about how not only did it educate the kids, but it educated the community, because the Truxton Auditorium was a meeting place and folks came there for all types of things. And he felt it was his responsibility. And I'm sitting here going, wow. He showed me an article one time where the newspaper talked about this Black principal that took about 80 teachers and administrators. They went to Cuba. Curry took them all to Cuba. He likes to joke about, this was before Castro. He said Castro was still up in the woods. So Cuba was being run by a guy named Batiste. Okay. And Mr. Curry, I'm talking about, you're talking about a visionary. This guy came and brought a lot to Portsmouth and Portsmouth public schools.
He
and
did.
The white folks could care less about what was going on in the Black schools. They just, you know, they you know, and it was 3 principals. And Curry came in. He was the young whippersnapper. He had Mr. S.H. Clark, and then you had Professor Riddick that was at Narcombe. But those guys were older then. And when Mr. Curry came in, Mr. Curry is the one that actually introduced the filing system to the Portsmouth public schools. I mean, this guy was an innovator.
He
Mr.
was.
Kerr is the guy that started the credit union that the teachers have. That credit union right there now on Dinwiddie, that was started by Mr. Curry. And I asked him, why did you do that? He said he was sick and tired of his teachers being used and abused by these loan sharks and these good old boys during the summer, because they would take off and some of them didn't have pay.
Exactly.
So these teachers would go and get bridge loans and stuff like that. And he said they spend the rest of the year paying them guys for the money they borrowed just to make it through the summer.
Make it through the summer.
Mr. Curry goes to, and I know y'all know this name, Frank D. Lawrence.
Yes.
The stadium used to be named after
Frank D. Lawrence Stadium.
Frank D. Lawrence was a banker.
Yes.
Mr. Curry went and met with Frank D. Lawrence. This is how powerful this brother was back in that time, and told him what he wanted to do. And Frank D. Lawrence allowed Mr. Curry to set up an account at Nations Bank, National Bank. It was something downtown that Mr. Lawrence ran. And that teachers credit union started in that bank as an account. And people, because here's another thing, how powerful he was. And I know we'll get to our subject, but this stuff you can't overlook. This is history. There were teachers and people in Portsmouth that couldn't get a vehicle, couldn't get a car without somebody like Mr. Curry speaking for them.
Yes.
He used to say, I would speak for him. And so those people did not want to upset Mr. Curry. They would let him know that, hey, Joe Blow over here at the car lot gonna be calling me and my wife, we trying to get a car. And I was like, wow, you had that much power. That was fascinating. You got to remember during that time how powerful that was for a Black man. And that's why our preachers and our principals back in that time were mostly our leaders in our communities. And a lot of them, like Mr. Curry, did a lot to help influence a lot of things that were going on. So they asked him to speak back in 95, and I got some comments that he made. But anyway, thank y'all for letting me on. And you know, Slim, I can go on and on and on. So y'all got to either wave. I love our history. I love finance.
Yes.
I love talking about it. And it just hurts me when I see every year Black history. We talk about all of these, I call them lightweight things, everything that the media and white folks then put into our history for us to learn, you know, how good Dr. King was and how good, you know, they never want to talk about W.B. Du Bois.
Right.
You know, it wasn't until when did Spike Lee make the Malcolm X movie? A lot of us wasn't even aware of the contributions of Malcolm X. You know, and there would not have been a Martin if it wasn't a Malcolm.
Exactly.
You know, because they had to take a choice. You know, and then you go and learn about Jeffrey Wilson here in Portsmouth.
That's right.
George Piedmont. Jeffrey Wilson was an interesting guy. I mean, we know him because they named the neighborhood after him, but this old dude educated himself by himself and hanging around white folks. He was a slave in Portsmouth to one of the richest families in Portsmouth. And then that woman's husband died and she married a guy named Grice or something like that. And he wound up belonging to that family, but they were also wealthy. So you imagine, and say this to kids, if you're around folks that know things and do things and you don't learn nothing from them, something wrong with you. My daddy used to always say, you've been hanging around them for this long and you still don't know how to change the engine or change the starter or change the water. You've been around there. I mean, you know, it's just, so whether you had formal education or whether you was there, and this guy, Jeffrey T. Wilson, I mean, you really got to look him up and read some of his inputs in his diary. I was shocked to find out that Virginia Tech purchased from a bookstore owner in Portsmouth the diary of Jeffrey T. Wilson. And their kids had an assignment of going through his diary and all of his entries and trying to translate. Because Jeffrey Wilson was an interesting guy in how he wrote. He always talked in the third person. He joked a lot, he was called himself Ye Scribe. He was scribe. You know, back in the day, they had a
Yeah.
scribe,
The
and
scribe,
he would
yes.
ye. And ever he mentioned in his writings, "Oh, ye scribe," he's talking about himself. You know, ye scribe went to church, you know, and he was huge in the AME church. He was a teacher. He was a part of the leadership committee. He was a part of the finance and all of that. He interfaced with the pastors. He was very opinionated. He talked in the colored notes a lot about the church and what was going on. I mean, it was interesting. And if you go back and look, we're back to business now. Go back to 1924, when this guy, Norman Hamilton, a young white boy that had taken over the Portsmouth Star, he picked Jeffrey Wilson to do this. Man, you know, we had a black paper, the Journal and Guide, and black folks had other ways that they communicated. But this young white business guy saw something in his, I guess, circulation of the paper, and he wanted to get black folks reading the Portsmouth Star. So he got Jeffrey Wilson, and they created what's called the colored notes. And everybody make reference to the colored notes. But guess how old Mr. Wilson was when he did that? He was 81 years old. And no, he died 5 years later. He was like 86 years old. He got killed, got run over by a car. But the comments and the opinions that he rendered in his colored articles were both educational to black people, but he also knew he had an audience of white folks, which was what the Portsmouth Star was. And he had to be very careful with how he conveyed certain things. But I mean, you go through that Virginia Tech, go through that diary. He wrote that diary in like 1913, Leah, and there is stuff in there that he talked about. And it was just fascinating the way, and the other thing, he had a nickname for black folks. He called us Ain't Haggard's children. So whenever in his writing, he would always say, y'all better treat Ain't Haggard's children right. He was talking about black folks. And he was one of the first blacks, Slim, back in the day that were trying to convince black people to leave the Republican Party. He said, I understand it's the party of Lincoln and what they did with the emancipation and freeing the slave, but they are playing us. This is a new day, and y'all still hanging your head. As a matter of fact, they got an excerpt that he wrote, and it was entitled to the Grand Old Party, talking about the GOP. He said, y'all better start treating Aunt Haggard's children right. And if you don't want to help us, tell us, because we can go on. It was hard convincing black people that they needed to switch parties.
Yes.
So you know how that is today with politics. Yes.
And Kenny, you mentioned, and I know you're going to get into this as far as wealth in the black community and how it's always been wealth in the black community. You're talking about Jeffrey Wilson and Colored Notes and the Journal and Guide. They had a section there called the Society page.
Yes.
And that's where people knew about who was doing well, you know, and I can take you back. I think it was the Journal and Guide. When I got married the first time, I came back home and saw my marriage announcement in the Society page of the Journal and Guide. And that was, you know, and like I said, you'll probably get into this. It's always been black wealth through our communities. But certain things throughout the country has sort of derailed that, or people, you know, just don't know. So you'll get into that. So I didn't know if.
But remember what that stuff really did, though. It educated and informed the black community of what was going on. I mean, it was a full of stuff, church announcements and all of that. But it also talked about people leaving, going on a business trip, or somebody coming to town to do something. So people got interested, especially with the Journal and Guide, especially the network that was set up in Truxton. Oh my God. When you get into the Truxton and how it was created and the folks that were there that came from all over the country to work for the shipyard.
That's right.
And they formed this new government. And they ran this city, and the things that they did, they taxed themselves. They had their own police. They did all of that stuff, their own school.
They had their own little city within the city.
Home city, yeah. Well, it really wasn't even within the city then, because Truxton wasn't a part of Portsmouth.
Right.
And
You're right. You're right.
When they first created Truxton, they had an advisory board that they put together here in Portsmouth, and it was made up of a couple of prominent Black people from Lincolnville. Lincolnville was our Greenwood.
Yes.
Okay, but it didn't wind up getting destroyed and all, but Lincolnville was self-sustaining, had store. That's where Jeffrey Wilson lived. That's where George T-Mont was living. Well, he died. Jeffrey Wilson was about 25 years younger than T-Mont. T-Mont left Portsmouth. T-Mont was a Kenny Wright. T-Mont was one of the ones that went to the Senate right after the Civil War and Reconstruction. They voted T-Mont. And matter of fact, Jeffrey Wilson talks about this in his diary. He was one of the delegates, Jeffrey Wilson, that nominated George T-Mont to be the representative from Portsmouth. He thought that much of George T-Mont and what George T-Mont did during his time in Portsmouth, because all these guys worked in the shipyard. And for all your listeners, and if young people listen, read and look what these guys had multiple jobs. Jeffrey Wilson, and I think this is where he got most of his education. Not only did Jeffrey Wilson work in the shipyard, Jeffrey Wilson was a bailiff over in the federal court in Norfolk. Can you imagine being a bailiff sitting in there listening to lawyers present their cases, the judge rendering verdicts? Can you imagine a man educating himself, listening to those rulings, listening to people cite the law? Jeffrey Wilson he was the total package. And at 81 years old, we're talking about what he did at 81. Colored Notes was from 1924 to 1929. And he died the way everybody joked he was going to die. He got run over because the old man never drove. He walked the streets of Portsmouth, and he talked horribly about the sidewalks in Portsmouth. He would walk down the middle of the road because the sidewalks hurt his feet.
Hurt his feet, yes.
And they told him, Mr. Wilson, somebody's gonna run your ass over. and they did. One night in, I think it was June of 1929, he was walking home from church, Emmanuel AME, in the middle of the street, and the paper called it a young Black fella of good means, hit him. He was driving a truck and he didn't see him. And he lasted about two months. They finally brought him home, and he died in his son's home out here in Lincolnville. But
Kenny, for the sake of the young people who are on, the younger people are not young, but tell them exactly where Lincolnville is. I'm getting a question. Where's Lincolnville?
Yeah, Lincolnville is downtown now in what they call Old Town.
Yes.
Lincolnville. Yeah, go ahead, Slim. I see you waving.
Can you tell them where Lincolnville is first? Time to transition.
We got about 4 minutes before we leave the radio. And let me say this before, so you can make the transition without interruption. I want to thank all the listeners on WGPL 1350 AM for listening. And we'll be leaving the air about 7, but you all can go to Leah's Facebook page if you want to continue listening to the conversation. Thank you. And we'll see you next week when we'll be talking about heart health. So join us then. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, but before you go, Kenny, before you go, and let me get one more thing in here. So if for those who are out there in electron land, if you love what you're hearing, and this is the only place that you're going to see this, hear this kind of message, you can send a donation to Portsmouth Coffee Talk, P.O. Box 7664, Portsmouth, Virginia 23707, and we'd love to have your help so we can continue forming our city and this nation about these subjects that are dear to our hearts and dear to your hearts. So go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, Lincolnville was the first development in Portsmouth for middle-class Black folk. And it was on Lincoln Street, and it went all the way back pretty much to the water. It came all the way to Effingham Street, right there straddling Effingham Street. So when you ride down there, you look now, what is out there now? You got the Naval Hospital and that whole land there. What is that called? Fort something. Anyway, that field, all of that going up to even where Swimming Point is, all of that part was Lincolnville. And we had an enormous amount of wealthy, intelligent Black folks that all lived there together. Of course, you know, Mayor Holly, his birthplace is right there on North Street,
right,
2 doors down across the street from the church. And that's still there. Now, I think they say there's about 2 other houses that are still there, but they part of what white folks call urban renewal. They had a plan to get rid of that because clearly they wanted that land. That was not only happening in Portsmouth, but it was happening all over the country. It was a backlash to, I call it Black progress and things in places like Greenwood. There were a lot of people disturbed at how well Black folks had built neighborhoods and businesses and supported each other. Now, a lot of them didn't have choice because of segregation, but Black folks made the best out of it. So that's why I question our young folks that don't want to understand business and innovation. Black people are some of the most innovative folks. There ain't nowhere else in the world can you have a group of people that make something out of nothing.
Out of nothing.
Okay.
That's right.
These people, and there were Black business folk, even in slavery time, guys. There were Black slaves. We talk a lot about Black folks being religious and Christian and all of that. Sundays was a natural day off for the slaves. What a lot of slaves did was went to church. But some of the more innovative ones after church or didn't go to church had little crops beside their houses.
That's
if
true.
You look at any of those little huts that we stayed in, you saw a little farm, a little garden where they grew stuff. And so a lot of those guys grew stuff to take care of their families, but they grew a lot of that to barter with the corner store. You know, a slave would, I mean, if he wanted his kids to have something and they didn't have money, or his wife, back then ribbons were and scarves, you know, women loved that. If my wife come up to this store and want this scarf or this ribbon, you let her have it and I'll straighten you out when that crop get in. And so he bring their watermelon. They had some Black slave up here in Williamsburg that they talked about all over the country. They call him the watermelon man. This guy, I mean, it was his slave master that was doing it. They laughed about how these guys were able to make little revenue and well, it wasn't really revenue. These guys were taking care of themselves. If I needed a car, my family needed something, that's how you got it. I mean, cooking utensils was big back then, and slaves they didn't have access to certain type of tools. They would go to the blacksmith or somewhere. They would get those things. So if you didn't have that, you were stuck with what the government gave you or what your slave master gave you. And so if that wasn't enough, then a lot of our innovative Black folks went on and get other things. And then you see white folks always hide it because they don't want the white man to know they had anything.
That's right. That's right.
Because they found out he had something, they go, oh, this is a smart nigga. You know, how you get this? You know, then all of a sudden you got a target on your back. And so that, I think, led to a lot of what's ailing our communities today when it talks about Black wealth and how we've always had wealthy Blacks and Blacks that understood it, but during the riots, the race riots in the early 1900s, all of the lynching that occurred throughout the South, these people were making statements to Black folks, and it resounded throughout our country. And very rarely will you find a Black man that has anything out on television talking about it. I mean, because they just didn't do that because of James Weldon Jones, who sung and authored the Lift Every Voice and Sing.
James Weldon Johnson, yes.
Johnson. He dubbed the 1919 summer as the Red Summer because of all the blood that was shed throughout this country with the backlash with Black progress. It startled us as a people for years. For years, because people don't forget folks getting killed, lynched, farmers out there being forced to defend their land because the white man keep moving the fence, letting his cows go over there and eat the farmer's corn, and the farmer trying to raise corn, and he go out there and all his corn gone because them damn cows over there eat. The white man provoking him to say, hey, I need you to keep your cows on your side. Go in the South and look at how many farmers and how much killing went on behind that dispute of where my land is versus yours. They thought the Blacks didn't understand land property, didn't understand the line. I mean, it's amazing how that viciousness had a huge impact. I mean, me as a kid, I always wondered, my daddy and other folks that I knew that had little side hustles, it was always on the down low. I always thought it was kind of illegal to have a side hustle because we, you know, I'm like, why are they always whispering? But it was just their generation. You gotta remember, my daddy was born in 1916. My daddy would be 108 right now. So I was an old man's baby. And that guy brought all of those things from Danville, Virginia, the country, during the recession during the 20s, when banks and all that stuff collapsed. These people lost money. They've eventually got it back, but that had a terrible impact on our generation and that generation. And it hadn't it not been for a lot of them leaving, going off to war and joining the military and all. I mean, you've been devastated in some of these areas that you just wasn't able to learn and pick up stuff like that.
Yeah. But Kenny, you know, that the oral history that you've just given, you know, our young folks today aren't the way history is going, especially in this country, are not going to hear it, especially in a large swath of our country, because, you know, with this false discussion of CRT and the whitewashing of American history, we're not, the young kids aren't going to see this, and if they don't know their history, then we will repeat the things that happened to us back then, because we are being lynched every day, you know, by the police or by corporate America every day. And I say we are being lynched every day.
That's right.
Somehow, theoretically lynched.
Colonel, you're absolutely right, man. I tell you, it is a shame, and that I think attribute to what ails us the most here, with us not having those examples for our young people, and these young people not seeing Black excellence. And I got to tell you, I told you I was a mentor of or a mentee of Hugo Owens, and Dr. Owens used to always talk about the complacency of the Black folks here in Hampton Roads. Wasn't just Portsmouth. There was very few here that would stand up and speak out and say things. And after, he loved to call Dr. King Martin. He says, after Martin, he said there was very few people that would take up that mantle. I mean, look what they did to Martin. I mean, and that was broadcasted throughout the country. So, you know, and this other thing that they did with the Black pastors, who at one time were bona fide leaders in the community. This whole threat of the IRS. You know, whenever you're a white guy say that, you know he's a racist, right? And he's trying to threaten and scare the Black pastors about what you talking about in that church, and you getting involved and talking about politics and talking about finance. We calling the IRS. And that would quieten a lot of us in this area down. I mean, and this is not to offend anybody that think we had leadership here. We had poor leadership. I mean, outside of guys like Dr. Owens, Judge Jordan over in Norfolk, there were very few of us that were speaking out against stuff. There was very few of us that would challenge the public libraries and the parks. Black kids couldn't go. There was very few of us. Now, we would follow, and he always had supporters, but it was very few of us that would do what George Tremont did. George Tremont was run out of Portsmouth. If you look at the history of that Black man who was the first Black senator from Portsmouth, they show no record after 1897 of George Tremont. He left. This guy owned land in Portsmouth, and when he went after Reconstruction to the Virginia General Assembly, they thought he was going to be a good nigger and do what they want. George Tremont's first bill that he put out was to abolish the whipping post. And then white folks were like, who is this nigga? We ain't abolishing no whipping post. Look, and the next thing that he tried to do was they pushed for public education. They had some liberal whites that believed in that because there were just too much ignorance in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I mean, white and Black. The only people that were educated were wealthy white kids. There were poor white kids that none of them went to school. I mean, they had some study back in the early mid-1900s, but you know, I think about 50% of the whites couldn't read or write. And so he had some traction. And the Blacks that were up there that were assigned to the delegation after Reconstruction pushed for public education. And the whites, even though they wanted it, insisted on segregation. And George Tremont and the other Blacks were up there were insistent that we cannot separate this. If we do, it's going to be a forest. So they got together when they couldn't convince their liberal white friends the importance of not segregating education. They knew they had the votes to pass it, but they all voted against it. Go read that and see. They were trying to make a statement. Now look what segregation done. It wasn't until Plessy versus Ferguson, and the Supreme Court had to force the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then that's when we had a period called what? Massive resistance.
That's right.
White folks, I don't care.
Schools down. Schools closed down.
Our kids are not going to school with these folks. And so now look in Portsmouth and Virginia Beach, look at when all these private schools cropped up. It was in the 50s based on what? Massive resistance. Churches, all of them started their own school. So the stuff that guys like George Tremont, now I'm still trying to research what school this was, but George Tremont, Black man in Portsmouth, opened the first public school in Portsmouth. And after they kicked him out of the General Assembly, and he was only there for a couple of years, and they figured he wasn't doing what they wanted. They need to find them another Negro. Well, they replaced him with a white man. And Black folks voted for the white man. Does that sound familiar? Hey, Kenny Wright,
of course.
Kenny Wright out here making noise. Kenny Wright lose, and Black folks voted for what? A white man. What did the white man do? Absolutely nothing. Right? Learn your history because you'll repeat it and not know. But George Tremont, when he came back from Richmond, right adjacent to his property was a building and another piece of land. Look at the land records. George Tremont bought that building to create the first public school in Portsmouth.
And where was that, Kenny? Where was the land?
I can't remember. I'm trying to figure out. I think it was somewhere around High Street, somewhere near the High Street and the Lincolnville area. He was adamant about it. As a matter of fact, Jeffrey Wilson talks about that in some of his notes. His notes. So they have no more records after 1897. Portsmouth have no records, land records of George Tremont being a citizen. They said he died. Okay, a couple of years later, and I think it was Elizabeth City County then, there was a George Tremont there that stayed with a woman, Sarah, which his wife's name was Sally. And they think him and his wife, Sally, moved there. And then about 2 or 3 years later, there was a George Tremont that name showed up in the Phoebus area of Hampton, living with a Josephine, which he had one of his later years, had a daughter that was named Josephine. So I think he was up in his probably 80s then. So he was an old man, but there are land records that show, because back then that's the only way you could track if somebody was alive unless they stayed there. So he actually went over to Hampton and stayed with his daughter, and I think he died over there. So he may have lived until the 1900s. But Portsmouth and others, go look up George T-Mont, kids, and see what they say about where he is. I think they got on his
spell his last name.
T-Mont, T-E-A-M-O-H.
T-E-A-M-O-H.
And all of the history shows what this one says right here. George T-Mont, born 1818, and then for the death after the dash, it says after 1887. So he died somewhere after 1887. That's because in 1887 is when he left Portsmouth in disgust, upset with fighting these people for basic things like public schools and doing things like that. That's why Jeffrey T. Wilson admired someone like him. So the other thing, and I know we're running out of time, that I want to study is why did this white boy from the Portsmouth Star pick Mr. Jeffrey Wilson to do this colored note? Now, this guy was in his 40s. He was a publisher at the Star, but he didn't actually buy the paper until 1924. And he tapped Jeffrey T. Wilson to do this. He was a businessman. This white guy name was Norman Hamilton. He eventually became a congressman. He was big in the Democratic Party. I'm just connecting that. Jeffrey T. Wilson was huge in the Democratic Party because he understood how the Republicans were playing. So I'm thinking through Jeffrey T. Wilson's masters and slave owners that were wealthy, this guy knew of him. And this guy was only 40 when he took over the Portsmouth Star. Why would you pick an 81-year-old man to do something like this? I mean, one, Jeffrey Wilson had lived a good life. He knew a lot. He saw a lot. He was born in slavery. So he even actually worked for the slave owner's son, was an officer in Richmond for the Confederacy. And Jeffrey had to go to Richmond as that son's assistant during slavery because he worked for that family. And he talks about what went on there. Imagine being a Black man with that kind of experience. And then you come home and then you go through this whole Reconstruction period and all of what we tried to do and fight for during Reconstruction just to get to the 1900s and the 1920s. And the things that he learned. So I'm curious about this white guy. I'm like, did he know something? Is he one of those guys that really wanted to elevate this Black man, or did he want to just compete with the journaling guy? Because remember, we had Black papers back then. So why did this white guy go tap this old Black guy to start this colored note?
To compete.
Right. And then all of a sudden, Black people start reading the colored notes. Now, mind you, the colored notes was in the paper, in the back, after the comic section, on the page where they did advertising, the colored notes was at the bottom of the page of the advertising page. So they didn't give Mr. Wilson, Jeffrey Wilson, they didn't give him much room, but he made use out of the space that he had. And he grew that subscribership. He grew that. So this white guy went on to be a congressman and doing a whole lot of other stuff. And so I'm like, wow, I got to research that guy. He either did it, one, for business, because you got to know it was always about business, but he could have been trying to promote and educate other white people about Black folk. You got Black people and what they do and how they get along, because you got to remember, this was 1924. The race riots was in 1919. Okay, they burned down Greenwood in what, 1921?
1921, that's for sure.
So this white guy is intrigued that these Black folks around the country are actually coming together and creating businesses and communities, and white folks out of anger are destroying it. So what better than to let this old black man have a column in my paper to start talking about this. I mean, so I don't want to give this guy Hamilton too much credit, because I do also know he was competing against the black newspapers, but there was something there for him to pick an old guy who was a leader in his church and worked in the courthouse, worked in the shipyard, did all these things. And I mean, it was just, I mean, he even talked about himself after the war, Civil War. Jeffrey Wilson joined the Navy. He went to France for a year. He talks in his thing, he says, ye old scribe was a lieutenant. Again, he called himself ye old scribe. So ye old scribe was a lieutenant.
You said he, H-E.
No, ye, Y-E.
Oh, ye old scribe.
Ye old scribe, because a scribe was a person that writes, but he referred to himself as ye old scribe.
All
Black
right.
folks as Aunt Haggard's children. And he had some other sayings that he had. Jeffrey Wilson, did y'all know this guy was married 4 times?
I didn't know he was married 4 times.
Jeffrey Wilson had 4 wives, outlived them all. I think he may have had a total of about 12 children. But every one of his wives in every marriage, they got younger and younger. And he was older and older. And it was just, and he wrote in his paper about that. And he would write about other people. An old man marry a young woman. And he would say, I send out my sympathy to her. I'm like, you send your sympathy to this old man that married this young 20-year-old girl. Then he had another article. There was an old
That's
lady.
what old men do, Kenny. That's what old men do.
But there was an old lady that married a young 19-year-old boy. She was in her 60s, almost 70.
Lord.
And he wrote in the paper, what is he going to do with that old wrinkle thing?
Oh.
This was back in 1925. Jeffrey Wilson was a trip, but he was opinionated. He said what he had to say. I'm sure he was cognizant of he was writing in a white paper, so he needed to be careful of some of the things he said, but he was unleashed. I mean, he was Oprah Winfrey before there was an Oprah Winfrey. And so, you know, and so it's intriguing. Go ahead, Slim.
Kenny, I just want to get this in because we got 2 people up here that are heavy investors. And, you know, historically, Black folks don't do a lot of investing, but we'll buy lottery tickets. We will go to casinos and spend our money. Talk about the importance of, and I don't want to say it's a stigma in the Black community about investments, more of a lack of knowledge about how to do it. And some people figure like you have to have a lot of money to really start investing. And investing is definitely an avenue for creating generational wealth. And talk to, and Colonel, you can step in here too, talk about the importance of educating yourself about investing. You know, I'll say this, we used to look at white folks and they be about 50 and we wondering how they retiring at 50. That's you right. know, one thing they got that leg up from that generational wealth that's been.
They got inheritance checks.
That inheritance
checks, and not saying that they didn't put in the work themselves, but they didn't have to work themselves.
But a lot of them did not. They just had wealth that was passed down from generation to generation, so they didn't have to. So it was very easy to retire at 50. But Slim, I'm glad you asked that. I got a couple of books, and this is primarily because y'all know I'm wealthy, and I've been a long time. Okay, I don't hide it, but I don't promote it either. Okay, I bought one of the first $1 million homes in Portsmouth. I'm sitting back here in my office now. Okay, I've been investing since I was working. I started working in the shipyard when I was 18 years old. Okay, I started putting $100 away a month. So I'm telling you, I got to this point starting from zero. So for all of our folks that like to make excuses and blow off, oh, he rich, so we can't do what he do. There are folks, now there's a woman here named Glenda Bridgeforth. She wrote a book entitled, Girl, Get Your Money Straight. You need to read that book, your listeners. There's another one here, Dennis Kimbrough. He says, The Wealthy Choice. The Wealthy Choice. Then Kimbrough with Napoleon Hill wrote another one that says, Think and Grow Rich. A Black Choice, Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice. And then finally, there was Michelle Singletary. She wrote a book called Spend Well, Live Rich. Spend Well, Live Rich. Those 4 books, and they take you from the very beginning. They take you, these are for people that were back in the day that might have been house cleaners, porters, stuff like that. These were people that came from very humble beginnings, that learned to put at least 10% of their money away, and then learn to build that wealth and be able to transfer that into other things. But this stuff, and I'm telling you, this is our history, but our people don't understand it. They think it's foreign to see a rich Black guy. You see a guy like me that don't bother easy. When I was in politics, I couldn't be bribed. It wasn't about you making an offer to me for something. I was like, you can think clearer and do things, but other Blacks won't understand that because they all are caught up in the white guy giving you a donation. And so since he gave you a donation, you and him now buddies. So I'm out here trying to put policy and legislation together to help you. And he brings you to the meeting to speak about what a good white man he is. And you're sitting there going, oh my God. He giving her $200 to her church, and she up here telling everybody how great this guy is. That's the mindset we have. We got those people all over Portsmouth, not just here, but all over. I mean, I think of that racist sheriff we had and how he had all of those Black people.
Yes, he did. All of a watermelon and bananas.
Oh my God, what he could do. He giving away firewood and smoke detectors. People didn't even have fireplaces. I'm like, what he got firewood? He give it to them. It don't matter. It was a way to bribe. We got to understand how important this money is in the Black community. One of the biggest attributors to this absence of Black wealth is they talk about the circulation of a dollar and how long a dollar stays in the Black community versus other communities. A dollar stays in the Black community 6 hours, not even a day. A dollar stays in the Jewish community for 20 days. A dollar stays in the white community almost infinity. Okay, and then you got Asians. I think the Asian community, the dollar stays around about 7 or 8 days. But the Black people, the dollar stays in there a half a day. That's where the biggest problem is. Greenwood, that was created out in Tulsa, the dollar stayed in that Black community for 20 days. They taught Blacks to learn how to support your business and to go into business. The guy that started Greenwood was a guy named O.W. Gurley. O.W. Gurley was from the South. Like most Black, they left after Reconstruction because of all of the persecutions that were going on. He was a businessman in the South, down in Mississippi and Alabama. He went to Tulsa. O.W. bought the 40 acres that Greenwood was built on. O.W. named it Greenwood. Greenwood is named after Greenwood, Mississippi. So look up O.W. Gurley. Okay, he was the guy. He was also like the Chamber of Commerce. O.W. advertised to other Blacks throughout the country, come here to Greenwood, build a home, build a business. We are building with Blacks, for Blacks. That's how bold this guy was. He got the attention of J.B. Stratford. Y'all heard that name, the Stratford Hotel?
Yes.
So J.B. came to Tulsa, Oklahoma with the enticement of O.W. J.B. built the first hotel there. He built the Stratford Hotel that was 54 rooms. He had a dancing hall, music parlor. He had a casino in there. They had everything in Greenwood. JB, his first name is JB, stands for John the Baptist. His father was a slave. His father was JC, and the last name was after his slave owners. After his father learned to read as a slave, they were on their way back from Canada when his father read and heard about the emancipation and challenged their owner, got his freedom right there on his way from Canada out of Ontario, I believe. On his way back, there is a street name in Canada that's called Stratford. That's where he got his last name. He immediately dropped that white man's name, and he took the Stratford in Canada, and the ending of the word ended, the Stratford ended in a T. He changed it to a D. He was J.C. Stratford. The J.C. stood for Julius Caesar. And when he named his son John the Baptist Stratford, who his dad had been a smart slave, got his freedom, taught his kids to read and educate. Stratford now was one of the richest men in America. He had hotels all over the country. Look up J.B. Stratford and the hotel. Guess what's out in Cavalier Manor? There's a street out there called Lincolnville. And there's a street called Stratford.
Yes.
I would bet that those two streets are named after those two gentlemen or that neighborhood. Stratford. Well, guess who Stratford, when this, I guess, a riot occurred or massacre occurred, they almost killed Stratford and his family. He had 5 children and they were down in the basement. He was out fighting the mob. They poured gasoline and burned that place down. And if his mother was in that basement with his wife and his children, they managed to get out. Stratford left and went to Chicago after the race riots when they burned down that. O.W. went to California. There was another very important guy named Smitherman. He ran the newspaper in Oklahoma. He aggravated the white folks the most because he was like Jeffrey Wilson. He had his paper and he was telling the people what was going on, what to look for. So Smitherman was the guy they were really after during the riots. He left and he went all the way to Boston, Massachusetts. He had to hide in Boston. Remember, the state of Oklahoma had warrants out for these guys' arrest. They are charged all of those Black people for inciting that riot. Didn't charge or arrest not one white. Some of those guys, they lived the rest of their life somewhere else in exile with this warrant hanging over their head. J.B. Stratford went to Chicago, but this is what the family and what you pass down. This man still educated his kid. His granddaughter, Jewel, was one of the first Black women that was appointed a solicitor general, a deputy solicitor general. Her son, okay, she married a Rogers. Her son now is the CEO of Ariel Investments. Look up Ariel Investment. It is the first Black investment firm in America. Okay, John Rogers, the great grandson of this guy Stratford that was in Greenwood, that left and went to Chicago. This is his great grandson, and Ariel Investments right now is managing about $10 billion. Look up Ariel Investments and John Rogers. And this guy knows his history about his mama and how strong his mama was and growing up, and his mama always talked about granddaddy, and because her father and them were so shocked behind the riots, that generation did not talk about that for years. They were afraid to talk about it because, again, they were looking for granddaddy. Them white folks were going to kill granddaddy if they found him. And thank the Lord for states like Massachusetts. They found out one of them was in the newspaper guy, Smitherman. They found out he was in Massachusetts, and they tried to get him in the state of Massachusetts, told Oklahoma to kick sand. We ain't honoring that crap. You're not coming in our state looking and trying to run these guys down and hang them. He stayed in Massachusetts for 5 years, guys. Then he went to Buffalo, New York. He got as close as he could to the Canadian border. And guess what he did there? As an old man, he started another newspaper. It's called the Buffalo Star.
Mhm.
Tell me somebody been persecuted, family almost killed. That man understood business. He understood how important it was. Go look at the history of the Buffalo Star and this guy Smitherin. Okay, he was like I think it was AJ. His initials stood for Andrew Jackson Smitherin. I'm telling you. But you know how we were named back then. We were named after white people, and you had all that. And these guys got rid of. I love this Stratford guy. I had no idea Stratford was the name of a street in Canada. But he immediately after emancipation said, I ain't carrying this white guy name now, not an inch further. So he showed back up as Julius Caesar Stratford.
Yeah. Hey, but Kenny.
The names like George Washington Jefferson. But,
Yes.
Before you go, I have to read this comment. Young lady wrote, she's been here since 69. They moved here in 69. This is the most Black history she's heard since she's been here. And that was by, what's her name?
Kathy Cuffy Moore.
Kathy
Cuffy Moore.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kathy. There's a lot more out there. Guys, I'm telling you, we could go on forever.
Well, what we're gonna try to do here is create a quarterly thing and call it Masterclass in Black History. So we can celebrate Black history all year round, and hopefully, if you agree, Kenny, you'll be our.
I love it. I love it. Whenever you guys want, and then we can talk about John Kerry and his speech. But just remember that the first Black manager of Truxton was a guy named Fred McCracken.
Fred McCracken.
Okay,
yes.
Well, his initials, first name was FD. It stood for Frederick Douglass McCracken.
McCracken, yes.
Okay,
yes.
He was a powerful brother, but he worked for the government. He was sent there to be the manager. And there's a lot in what he did and how he brought those people together in Truxton to form that. But you got to understand, and we can talk about, and I'll leave you to this last thing here. Please research federal government, the Department of Negro Economics. Back in 1917, and the Department of Labor created a Department of Negro Economics because the federal government was so interested in the Black labor force, and they knew very little about us. And there was a lot tug of war going on in the Wilson administration with his racist butt, but his secretary was a guy named Wilson. And his deputy was a guy named Post, a white guy who worked with W.B. Du Bois and them to help start the NAACP,
yes.
to help start the Urban League. They went to Du Bois and said, we want a strong Black man that can run this department because this is going to be big news. Du Bois and them told him to go down to Fisk University and hire Dr. George Haynes, who was a professor at Fisk, and Dr. Haynes wound up running that department. Okay, this was after doing a lot of lobbying because there was a Negro in Richmond that wanted that job, who was a lawyer and who was a butt kisser. He had lobbied and got both state senators of Virginia to recommend him to the president to head this Negro department. And W.E.B. Du Bois wrote one of his, he always had scathing writings in his crisis.
Yes, he did.
But he talked about this Negro in Virginia so bad. And he told the president that this guy is one of the worst Negroes our race has ever produced. And if you want to make a force out of this department, you appoint him. They went down there, they followed Du Bois's lead. Dr. Haynes came in, and that's how you got Truxton. It was guys like Dr. Haynes that built a network all throughout the South, trying to understand and help Black people doing what we call the Great Migration. They were leaving the South, going up north for these industrial jobs, and they needed help. And I'm telling you, we can spend a whole show just on the Black migration, but look up that Department of Negro Economics, and you'll understand how important money is and why Black people need to turn this ship around and start thinking about investing and supporting each other and fixing this ridiculous number of only $1 circulating in the Black community for a half a day. That means every time we get money, we run somewhere and spend it with somebody that's not helping us.
Mm-hmm. Hey, you know, Kenny, you hit so many points, and I thank you for that. And one of the things you just hit me with, and now that the president, Biden, has said, I'm going to choose a Black female to replace, sit on the Supreme Court.
That's right.
And what kills me is I see even Black commentators on TV talking about this will be the third Black person to sit on the court. And I wish there was a Du Bois out there would talk about, because every time I hear that third Black person, I would say he'd be the second Black person to sit on.
That's right. That's exactly right.
You're right. You're right about that, Colonel.
Because Du Bois would write a paper on Clarence Thomas.
Clarence Thomas.
And quote,
would eat him alive. Would eat him alive.
Would eat him alive. Because even Thurgood said a Black snake and a white snake are the same. And Clarence Thomas hits that, because what has he done but go against every, he said he's the most, he's rated the most conservative person on the court, but he is also, other than his Black skin, he looks like my computer screen or the piece of paper I bought.
Colonel, his wife is running that show. He's not running that show. His wife is running that show. She is telling him how to vote and what to vote for and what not to vote for.
Yes.
Look, I'll leave y'all with this one quote about buying power. This is another thing that Black people confuse. Buying power versus wealth creation and money circulation. This is one of the reasons this money only stays in the Black community for a half a day, okay? Although Black people have more buying power than ever before, their economic prosperity is still limited. Buying power, or the amount of income someone has to spend, doesn't equate to economic growth.
Yes.
Although Black people have nearly $1 trillion gross national income, only 2% is reinvested in the Black community. So imagine that. We're spending $1 trillion and 2% goes back to help our communities.
That's true.
We are our own worst enemy.
Yes. And we are at the tip of the iceberg for a crisis of America, for Black America. And you quoted, the percentage of 10%, saving 10%, which we don't do.
That's right.
And then I go back to the discussion, and a lot of young folks that says, since we're getting away from the, when Reagan got us away from having pensions and put us on the 401k plan, and you ask the young folks, are you putting in more than the 1% that is federally mandated to put in your 401k plan, which is going to be the thing that you're going to live on when you get old?
That's right.
If you don't, you'll be eating cat food. And later on, when you get old, that and Social Security. So, and then when they ask, well, I'm some folks that are putting money in there, they ask me, I'm maxing out. And I said, what is max out to you, the definition? And then, so the definition for me is max out is the IRS level, is the top level, today is 24.5 or something like that. That is the max level, and you won't feel it. So those who have maxed out, if you look at when Obama came in, economy was crapped out, you're buying more shares within the in your thrift savings plan. If you were doing your 15 to 20% or whatever, which you would not have filled,
that's right.
You're almost you're one of the folks that are now is a 401k millionaire today, or you're getting close to it.
That's right.
And so the other piece is also with your investment, your biggest investment should be is in your education.
That's right.
Because that is the road to a future. And if you are educated, pass your high school into even in a trade or you go to college, that gets you a couple steps ahead of your contemporaries. And then you also, I always say when I was in the military, it says, whatever the standard is, you got to get 2 of.
That's right. Okay.
So they said for me to progress, to make colonel, I had to have a master's and do this stuff in military education. So I went out and got 2 masters.
That's right.
And
you got to be twice as good. You colonel, you just got to be twice as good.
And so when I made 06, you know, I was the 7th African-American male to make 06 in our history of the Army Nurse Corps. 7th. And at the time, it's 115 years. And so that by itself would tell you something's wrong with the system.
Sure.
Yes. So if you also look at the other piece of the power is the power to vote that our young folks aren't taking advantage of. They give that away. They sit home. And that's why we have a racist governor and a racist attorney general and a crazy lieutenant governor sitting up there today because we sat home.
Right.
And got food. And
we're caught up in all of the sidebar. We like distractions. It is easy to distract Black people. Remember when George Bush beat Al Gore? What did he go out there and trick all them stupid pastors about this clergy money that he gonna satisfy? Had all them Black folks in his camp. Guess what they all did? Slowly walked away after he found out he used them. T.D. Jakes, a whole lot of them. Caught up in we gonna get something. That man was trying to get in that White House. He got in there and done things to hurt Black folk. But he ain't nowhere near as bad as this guy Trump. You'll be talking about the stuff that Donald Trump did for the next 100 years. But please, this whole business thing, we got to come back. Slim, Operation Breadbasket. Anybody ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The SCLC, Dr. King brought that in. It was a total economic program. It was to try, please, everybody listening, Operation Breadbasket. They went out and challenged these businesses that were not treating Black folks right, that were not hiring Black people, that were not doing business with Black minority groups. Operation Breadbasket did wonders in Atlanta. And then the next year, that's where he tapped Jesse Jackson to start the Operation Breadbasket chapter in Chicago. Jesse Jackson made such an impact in Chicago, and millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs were created. I mean, Dr. King was assassinated and a lot of that stuff went by the wayside. Jesse Jackson got to fighting with Ralph Abernathy and all of that stuff came. Then Jesse left and started Rainbow Push and Operation this. And I mean, it just tells you, again, guys, we talk about leadership. Another thing Black people don't want to talk about, a succession plan. We always think we're going to be in power forever. So we don't never think about who's a good number 2. Look at all these Black universities. These guys going to die off and everybody going to scramble looking for somebody because nobody prepared the next man in line, the next woman in line. We don't do that. Okay, just look at that. But Operation Breadbasket, they wanted to set up chapters all over the country. And guess where they got that from? There's a Black preacher up in Philadelphia of the old Zion Church. His name was Leon Sullivan. Look up Reverend Leon Sullivan.
I knew Dr. Sullivan. I traveled to Africa with Dr. Sullivan 3 times.
Dr. Sullivan had a huge delegation going back and forth to South Africa.
I went with him.
He created a set of principles for all businesses that wanted to do business in South Africa.
He did.
Look up the Sullivan Principles. That Black preacher was awesome. Guess what his nickname was? They call him the Lion of Zion.
That's right, the Lion of Zion.
Zion was the biggest church in Philadelphia, had about 6,000 members, and Sullivan went through the streets of Philadelphia and broke those businesses down one by one. You gonna hire these black folks or we ain't spending one dime. Yes. Dr. King got word of what Sullivan did up in Philly. Dr. King met with the Lion of Zion, and King said, we need that in the SCLC. And he started that chapter in Atlanta. But Jesse Jackson was such a young kid that had all kinds of motivation and wanted to do things. And King knew that if he put somebody like Jesse in there, he could get his message across. And in Chicago, it worked. You look at Atlanta, you look at Chicago, and you look at all those black businesses. Look at what the mayor did in there, Maynard Jackson, when they was talking about building that airport. And all these white folks gonna build that airport in Atlanta. Maynard Jackson, mayor, said, not only no, hell no. You're gonna get a black contractor, every one of y'all, or we not building this airport. That set Atlanta on the map. Atlanta is now international. Everybody in the world comes to Atlanta. All of those black businesses, most of that can be attributed to the work that Maynard Jackson did.
That's right.
And how he stood up and say, you are going to do black business. I noticed y'all had a piece last week on the minority contracting in Portsmouth. Just ridiculous.
Yes.
We need our asses kicked. We have done nothing with that program. I started that back when I was mayor.
Ushered that in. Yeah, you ushered
and it's
that
done
in.
nothing. It's been 7 years. And now by law, we have to go and do another study because after 7 years, you can't use that data. Right. Can now come and say, oh, that's old data. So you got to refresh that data. And guess what, who I fought when I first started pushing that as mayor? Not white folks, black people.
Yeah.
That's another story. I could name to you the blacks that we all in love with here today that were against minority contracting and that I was going to upset the apple cart. There's another way to do this. I'm like, oh, there is? Don't tell the Lion of Zion up in Philadelphia that. Don't tell Dr. King that down there at Operation Breadbasket. We in here some 50 years later talking about there's another way to get this. We ain't got nothing in the last 50 years and we tickle to death.
Well, you know what, Kenny, that same group that you're talking about, I've always said that they don't have the bandwidth to understand history. And when I say bandwidth,
they're enjoying their time in the sun. Colonel, they're enjoying being the go-to person for the black community.
Yes.
White folks come to you, that gives you clout that they come to you. They're trying to be a John Kerry. Well, guess what? John Kerry used his status to help his teachers and to help those people. John Kerry didn't use that to help himself. I mean, that's the difference when you wield that kind of power in certain people in our community. We get it confused and think it's about us. You're just a vessel. Your community is hurt. Nobody has businesses. Nobody's got money. Now you got kids with guns. They shooting everything. The parents are going from defending their kids and being quiet. Now the parents are scared of them. Where are we going with this? Where are we going with this foolishness? These same black folks that's not speaking out on this, that's not saying something. The government's not going to do that. That ain't the mayor's job. This thing will only be fixed when black people decide it's time to fix it. And we need to stop depending on the government, thinking somebody gonna give you something. Think of them slaves that out there that had those crops beside their house, making extra money to take care of their family and buy things. Think of those black folks that started business and selling cattle and corn and all that. Think all that, and you sitting around here waiting on a stimulus check and fighting over who gonna get the stimulus money and how we gonna get to all these shyster organizations. It is amazing. You know, I sit here and learning our history and being a student of it, and I see this and I can't say anything because you're in the minority. Most of our people don't understand. Most of us don't know the black folks that fought years ago against creating Swanson Homes and the neighborhood Jeffrey Wilson. They knew the destruction that would happen in the black community. They had black pastors out telling people that it was okay. Now look, 6 generations later, we still got the same families, same folks in Swanson home, Dale's home, waiting on somebody to rescue them when we need to be rescuing ourselves.
Yes.
And because one or two of us come out of those communities and we do well, we use that as the model, and we don't look at the other 90% that are still there. The federal government has blood on their hands. The federal government purposely set this stuff up. The federal government purposely, through discrimination in housing with the old Federal Housing Administration, they promoted that redlining. They forced Black people to be in certain areas. They sponsored all of these realtors and estimators depreciating Black property and over appreciating white property. You know how much generational wealth we lose when your house worth $1 million and somebody come and say, oh, it's 700. You supposed to be happy because 700 is a lot. That's $300,000 that you won't get for your kids and your grandkids. That's summer camp, that's private school, that's all of that stuff. We ignore that kind of stuff. Instead of, when we see that kind of racism, we do like that football coach did. We take on the whole NFL. They're going to crucify that brother, but he's standing up. He's standing up because they've been playing Black folks for years. And we look at all of the Black millionaires in the NFL. We don't look at those guys are pawns. Those guys are getting paid because these owners are making billions. What they paying these guys is nothing.
We're gonna wind down now, Kenny.
I'm getting wound up. You got my winding down.
So we're gonna have to have another candid conversation about what you brought up in the last part of this real soon, because it's something that really needs to be talked about candidly. And we're gonna do this real soon, and discuss it with my co-host and see how we can fit it in real soon while it's still in the viewer's memory about what we need to be doing right here in the city of Portsmouth.
Right here in the city of Portsmouth. All right, I appreciate y'all inviting me. Sorry if I went on too long, but
that's okay, Kenny.
All kinds of subjects that we can talk about.
And also, Kenny, in light of those athletes, there's a book out called The $1 Million Slaves, and it's all about the athletes, and they are the $1 Million slaves now. So, but
I'd like to say, go ahead.
Great, James. Great, James. Great, James.
I wanted to say, you mentioned about the $1 million houses and offering $700. Let the people know in the communities, and I know we all getting them. These companies from out of town that often all in the Black communities offering money to
buy your home.
People in the Black community for your house, you know, and saying cash and everything like that. Please don't fall for that, because that's
Slim, that's been going on forever. They've been out Cavalier Manor. They done destroyed Truxton. Truxton is probably 85% renters now.
It is.
Okay.
It is.
And Cavalier Manor has been going by the wayside for the last 20 years.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a huge neighborhood, but they're slowly, one at a time, going in there, buying these houses, families losing them due to unpaid taxes, all of that stuff that our most best and brightest citizens moved out there in the 50s under George T. McLean development. And remember, they had a realtor, a Black gentleman that helped 99% of those folks. Y'all remember his name? Dick Carrington.
Yeah,
okay.
Carrington,
Richard Carrington, he helped them because Black people were so worried because they were taken advantage of with housing and mortgages. And one of their biggest purchases, they didn't understand what was going on, and they were taken advantage of all over the country. And thank the Lord for people like Dick Carrington, who was the realtor that would walk you through how to buy a house and get you out there in Cavalier Manor for $9,500. Boy, I tell you what, we can go on forever, but y'all have a good day.
Don't leave, Kenny. Don't leave. We're gonna sign off, but don't leave once we wait until we sign off.
Okay.
I want
Great,
to
James.
tell all the people that came on late during this conversation, make sure you watch the tape of this from the beginning to the end. And if you miss it on Leah's Facebook page later on, you can go to our YouTube channel and watch it. And when you go there, make sure you subscribe and help us out. Subscribe, comment, and share, and like as well. So, and one other thing I'd like to say, Colonel mentioned about our address, and as far as supporting us, you can also support us through Zelle at Portsmouth Coffee Talk at yahoo.com, or our Cash App with Portsmouth, no, PTC 1220, PCT 1220 Cash App. So make sure you support us so we can continue and grow this channel to the point. There's a lot of things we want to do as far as bringing the information. So that would help us out tremendously. And
Kenny, and when you return, maybe we need to address some of the issues that that Wesley is talking about. Is how do we talk wealth to our kids when they're in the streets killing each other? You know, what do we do to help our children to get beyond that point to where they need to be, so that they can talk about wealth? They can't talk about wealth right now because it's only death that's on their minds now. So we need to address those issues as well. Wesley Van has asked numerous questions in reference to that. So we need to
just remember, the lack of wealth is what's got us in this.
Exactly.
When kids and people don't see anything. They see no way out.
They don't see a future. They don't see a future.
They turn to the gangs, the drugs, the fast money, and all of that. And this is why we end up where we are. And it's because of a lack of wealth and parenting. Don't forget that, but a lack of business and wealth in the Black community. And these kids don't see no way out.
Okay, well, we're going to talk. We need to talk about that. So,
yes. And remember, go ahead, Colonel.
Yeah, and I'll jump on that too. And it says we need to also talk about, you know, Kenny, you talked about that $1 trillion of wealth in the Black community. And then so that is going to be passed down to the next generation. And then so if we don't have that succession plan or that estate plan and educate our youth, we'll see this go over and over again. Mom and daddy pass off and the house is sold by the kids because they don't know what to do with, or you have one kid and wants to force a sale and they buy a new car and that wealth is gone. And they actually end up with more debt than they had before. And and we need to talk about that succession plan and how to grow this institutional wealth through or generational wealth that pass on to the next generation, and educate our kids. And that's not happening in the Black community.
Just be aware, guys, when you start talking about these things to empower people, you're going to get a target on your back, not just white folks, but Black folks.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, people gonna start listening. And if they listen and they learn and they're prosperous, somebody's gonna come after you because there's a big business in being ignorant and Black. Remember that. It's a huge business in being ignorant and Black.
Mm-hmm.
No, but what Portsmouth Coffee Talks wants to share is bigger than all of that, Kenny. And going forward, we're gonna put the information out there and have those conversations that need to be had, and hope it leads to action and solutions. So thank you. And Portsmouth Coffee Talk is here for our voice,
for our community,
in our future.
In our future.
Have a prosperous day.
Kenny, stay on. We're getting ready to sign off. So stay on for 1 minute, okay?
All righty.
Okay, guys, let me stop the recording.